How's it going, everyone? What you're going to see today is sort of an LAV tips and tricks tutorial or something of the sort, and it'll feature, I think it's a run or two here illustrating my points in Altai range. And it's pretty good because I show infantry tips and I show other vehicle tips, and I'll give you my loadout strategies and everything of the sort. The reason I'm doing a separate smaller video here is because a lot of subscribers actually request it. But that being said, I am going to leave the link to my tank tutorial in the description, because as much as there are differences between LAVs, like say faster vehicle movement, being able to travel, and different actual attack strategies like the armor piercing shells I have on right now, and the tow missile, which I usually go as my default setup, there are differences in attack strategies and there are differences with regard to how each vehicle operates. But that being said, a lot of the tips with regard to actually like using cover, pillaring, and the attack strategies with them are basically 100% identical to what I put in my tank tutorial. So that being said, I will leave it in the description, and if you want a fuller, more comprehensive breakdown of how to operate them and the strategies you should use when operating them, give a good review of that tutorial, and that'll help you out the most. But in this one, I will break down the differences between tanks and LAVs for the most part, and the tips I like to use for success in them. The first thing I'll do, which should help you out the most to make the most sense of the situation, is to give you my breakdown of what I like to use for IFVs. The first thing, for the first primary weapon, you have the option of 25mm shells or the armor piercing, the APF SDST shell, which to me I think is the better option because it's far more cutting when it actually comes. It doesn't have an explosive payload, but the increased velocity compared to other shells of the same caliber cuts deeper into enemy armor, and it just unleashes a bit more damage. So that's why I'd always choose these, because when you face a tank, if you don't have the jump on him, or you don't have, for the most part, like the first go at attacking him, you're at a big disadvantage, because the amount of DPS that he's going to be able to put out on you, like the DPS rate he's going to be able to put on you versus him, is much higher. So if you don't have the jump on him and you're unable to attack him when he's damaged or not looking, he'll probably have the advantage on you. So that being said, any bit of DPS increase will help you out, and the armor piercing shell will help you out here the most. The secondary weapon here now is of course up to choice, and I think it should depend on what you're doing and the map you're playing in. That's my personal choice. If you're facing a lot of armor, like Altai range here has a ton of armor if you're facing other IFVs or other tanks. And that being said, when I know I'm going to be facing a lot of enemy armor, I choose the tow missile here. The tow missile is a wire-guided anti-tank missile that deals a large amount of damage to heavily armored targets and infantry within the blast radius. You basically just shoot it, and the thing that's about the tow missile that's great too is that the second you fire it, you can switch back to the armor piercing rounds, and as soon as you're firing the armor piercing rounds and dealing that damage out, the tow missile might take a bit longer to arrive, but once it does, you're still dealing two actual like components of damage to an enemy armor at the same time for the most part, and you get two to start with the tow missile too. So the second you fire one, switch back to the armor piercing rounds. When those get depleted, fire back or switch back to the tow missile and repeat the process, and you're putting out a great DPS, especially versus armor. So that would be the tip I would use when I'm facing armor. That being said, you can use Zuni rockets, which are actually pretty effective versus armor as well. But Zuni rockets I find are far better when dealing with infantry than, say, a tow missile would, and there's a lot of reason to that. It's just a logical statement. So basically, to sum up quickly, I'd choose the tow missile with regard to more armor-based maps like Altai Range, Dragon's Pass, but then the Zuni rockets for more infantry-based maps like, say, Hanoi Resort or something of the sort. That's up to you. But again, it's all preference. If you choose to use the tow missile full-time or the Zuni rockets full-time, I'm not going to stop you. I couldn't stop you anyway. That's up to you, and as long as you find you're being effective. But that's basically the breakdown that I'd use. Again, the countermeasure is up to you. For the most part, the only tool I actually even consider using are IR Smoke and Active Protection. IR Smoke, obviously, for larger maps where you find that a lot of people are using lock-ons. Like in Silk Road and a couple of maps of Obliteration I've played in the past, a lot of the time the guys that spawn in and parachute in will already be targeting me with a javelin. So IR Smoke would probably be the better option here, because since they have 4 rounds and it's going to take them for a while to hit the ground, IR Smoke will completely destroy the lock-on, so you can basically wait till it hits the ground and make it a fair fight. But at the same time, if you chose Active Protection in that case, awesome, you get to block 1 shot, but the other 3 will still take you down to 25 health, and that's assuming there isn't a second guy targeting you. IR Smoke would be a lot better to break the lock-ons. But if you find yourself in situations where you don't have to deal with that, because I don't find that'll be a circumstance that's very common, probably Active Protection will be best, because for the you can at least destroy 5 seconds worth of targets being sent at you, especially if you get in a tank fight. That's one of like the 4 shots that would probably take to kill you instantly destroyed, maybe 2 if you timed it right, and at the same time you can continue putting out DPS providing he doesn't have Active Protection. So that works the best. Active Protection is probably my favorite one to choose overall. But IR Smoke is much better if you choose to take the IR Smoke when breaking locks, or as a decoy. You can pop the smoke, go around and flank him. But again, up to you. Absolutely, I'm not going to force your hand here. Optics, again, up to you. I personally choose zoom optics because a lot of encounters I tend to get in differ between short and medium to longer range. And zoom optics tends to help with that. You can choose thermal optics if you're in, say, an area where it's like, say, Dragon's Pass, where it's a bit darker than average. So if you're choosing thermal optics, you might be able to see that pesky infantry guy trying to come to C4 you. So again, circumstance and map dependent. The next one here for upgrade, I'd say, is probably the most up for debate. A lot of people choose reactive armor and a lot of people choose auto loader. Me, I tend to choose auto loader. The only reason being that Active Protection isn't, or reactive armor I should say, isn't like what it is in Battlefield 3. It didn't absorb 1 shot. It doesn't completely absorb a shot anymore in Battlefield 4. It just reduces some of the shock from incoming attacks, reducing like the total damage that would account to go toward a critical hit. But I find for the most part that even when I have reactive armor on, a lot of the time I'll still get critical hit if I've let my guard down or someone sneak attacks me or something of the sort. So it doesn't help. Putting out something like auto loader where you're able to reduce the time taken to reload will dramatically increase your DPS, and as long as you're able to put yourself in a smart situation to prevent being sneak attacked, having a loadout that'll increase your DPS is only going to make you more successful. That's why I tend to choose auto loader. Again, paint should go to whatever map you feel your surrounding would be. Don't put the black shark camo paint on if you're going to be going into a desert or a winter map, I should say. Desert map would actually be pretty good for it. And again, like, don't put something like blue tiger on if you're going into, again, like a winter map. Be smart about it. And again, the gunner optics, if you choose to be a gunner, are between zoom and infrared or thermal, and I tend to choose proximity scan. The reason being, if I'm going to help out my gunner a lot, proximity scan lighting up potential infantry threats on the side is probably going to be far more effective to him than, say, cooking him with incendiary, which would actually be pretty entertaining, but not necessarily most conducive to success. But again, if you're actually interacting with your particular driver, then maybe the preferences may change, but again, that's up to you and him. But that's the loadout I tend to choose, and the logic behind why I tend to choose them. That's what I find the most success I have with them is. With regard to staying alive, playing defensive within vehicles tends to be the most conducive to it. But again, it differs on the strategy. Some guys are absolute snipers with tank shells or IFV shells, and playing them from a distance will probably put you at a disadvantage. Closing the gap and attacking them might actually be better for you. So that it comes to the situation and knowing your opponent, if you can know your opponent. But that's basically my breakdown for IFVs and why I have success with them and what I tend to choose them for. If you want to see a more detailed breakdown of all the tips and tricks and strategies I tend to use when attacking, when playing defense, per map situations, and like, say, pillaring, and knowing when and where to attack, using cover you're using in the map, make sure you watch the video that I'll link either in an annotation or in the description at the end, which basically breaks down my tank tutorial, because all the tips and tricks and strategies, minus the loadout, which I already broke down earlier in the video, obviously, is a better description of the sword, and will help you out immensely if you follow the tips. But that's basically the differences between the two. There aren't a lot of differences with regard to strategy, just in terms of loadout, and I gave you the loadout breakdown. Hope you enjoyed, and enjoy this last clip here of me basically taking out 2 forms of armor. See you later.